I'm here today with Jennifer R. Farmer. Jennifer is an entrepreneur, author, and host of United Methodist Women's Faith Talks podcast. She's the founder of Spotlight PR, a boutique firm serving leaders and groups committed to social and racial justice. Jennifer's held a range of senior leadership positions with national racial justice, labor, and faith-based groups. Her essays have been published in the Chronicle of Philanthropy, CNN, Huffington Post, The Root, Society for Nonprofits, and more. Jennifer's first book, Extraordinary PR, Ordinary Budget, a strategy guide, was published in 2017, and her new book, First and Only, A Black Woman's Guide to Thriving at Work and Life, was published by Broadleaf Books this past February. Through Spotlight PR, Jennifer represents a host of high-profile clients, including former Ohio State Senator Nina Turner, the Black Women's Leadership Project, Grammy Award-winning rapper Michael Render, the Reverend Dr. William J. Barber, and the United Methodist Women's Organization. So Jennifer, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on, Brian.
It's really a pleasure to meet you and learn about all the wonderful work that you've been doing.
Likewise, great to meet you.
So before we get into your books, can you tell us a little bit about your PR background and the work that you do there?
Sure. So my PR background is basically, I started doing PR for a faith-based organization many, many years ago, and quickly realized that I wanted to merge my commitment to faith with what I believe God was calling me to do. And that was to publicize and promote the work of people who were really trying to bring about change. So throughout my career, I've worked to elevate voices that would otherwise go unnoticed and to tell stories that would otherwise fall underneath the radar. The link that connects all the people that I work with is that they're all committed to racial justice. They're all committed to social justice. They're all doing something to make the world a better place. And so that is very gratifying for me. You know, and your audience knows that we are constantly bombarded with negative information. And sometimes I feel like, okay, well, what can we do? How can I make a difference? How can I use the talents that I have? And I have found that in the business of helping people to tell stories, helping people to elevate their work, an extreme amount of purpose and an extreme sense of giving back.
So the whole world of public relations has changed dramatically, over the past few years for a variety of reasons. How do you view it today, as opposed to maybe 15 years ago?
So 15 years ago, my focus was primarily on having a good story to tell. If I had a good story to tell, I felt like I had a really, really good chance of getting coverage. In today's environment, having a good story to tell is half the battle. You also have to know when to tell that story, who to engage, how to engage them, how to share that story on multiple different platforms. Obviously, 15 years ago, social media looked very, very different from what it is today. And so you're thinking about how to take a message and to break it down so that it fits with different audiences and different communications modes. Those were considerations that we didn't have, before. We're also living in a 24-hour news cycle. Media does not stop. It doesn't turn off at 5 o'clock. It doesn't turn off at 6 o'clock. And so in that, you're also balancing personal ecology as well as the ecology of people who you're working with. So it's a fine line, and certainly something that we did not have to think about over a decade ago.
So in, the marketing work that I do within the, book industry, what I've found is that the biggest challenge is rising above the noise. Right. I mean, given that everybody's online, everybody's trying to get your attention through social media and other places. That's the toughest thing.
Well, you're absolutely right. That's critical. But the other thing that I encourage people to appreciate is that the whole media landscape is contracting, especially when you talk about traditional media. Right now, in today's environment, you can create a platform and you can share your message. And so you have all these influencers, many influencers, but the people who work for mainstream outlets, that is contracting, and that creates increased pressure to cut through the noise and increased pressure to actually be the person who is heard. And so what I tell people is you have to have a mix. You have to have a balance of creating your own platform so that you can communicate directly with folks, but then also going to people who have larger platforms and who have trusted brands and things of that nature.
Good advice. So before we talk about the new book, can you tell us a little bit about the earlier book that you wrote?
Sure. So my first book is called Extraordinary PR, Ordinary Budget, A Strategy Guide. And I wrote that book in 2017, or was published in 2017. One of the things that I realized is that I was working with various grassroots groups and communities across the country, and many were doing incredible work, pushing incredible work, but they did not have the resources to hire a public relations firm, and sometimes not even to hire someone in-house. I also learned that there is a dearth of understanding around how to communicate a message effectively so that you increase the likelihood that you will be able to break through the clutter. So when I wrote Extraordinary PR, I wanted to put something directly in the hands of organizers. I wanted to put something directly in the hands of small groups without large budgets. And I also wanted to profile and highlight successful campaigns that I have been a part of, and to really think through what made this campaign successful. What did we do that might need to be replicated in different situations? And so what I say is that Extraordinary PR was about the work that I do. My latest book is about who I am in the world.
Yes. So let's talk about that a little bit. How did that book come about? What caused you to write that?
So, when I started writing First and Only, A Black Woman's Guide to Thriving at Work and in Life, I started writing it as a journal. And I was paying attention to the feedback that I was receiving, and then some of the feedback that I had received throughout my career. And I realized that I was receiving negative feedback that felt to me that it was racialized and that it was gendered. And that perhaps if I showed up as a white man, if that was my experience, then perhaps some of the feedback that I was receiving would not be an issue. And so I started just trying to make sense of what I was hearing. I quickly realized that what I was hearing and what I was experiencing, other Black women in my life had also experienced it. And so I said, okay, this is not just about your personal experience. This is about how different environments, how they welcome, how they create space, how they listen to and embrace the leadership of Black women. And so I remember sharing the book. When I first started writing, as the journal, I thought, okay, this is totally a journal. No one's going to want to hear from this Black woman about her perspective. I'm even taking the chance by focusing on Black women. And I shared the book with an editor friend of mine, and she said, yes, this is my experience. And so when I got her feedback, and then I started talking to different people in my life, I realized that what I was documenting was not unique to me. It was something that many Black women, and in fact, many women of color, were experiencing. And that's really how this book came to be.
Wow. Well, it's very cool that you pulled it together. I know a lot of folks like that first start a journal thinking that that's never going to see the light of day. And a lot of times, at least parts of it do. So it's a great, I want to say, role model, I think for other authors to follow.
Thank you.
So can you tell us a little bit about the content of the book, how it's organized, kind of what different major elements are there?
Sure. So the book is organized in several different sections. One, it's myths to resist. And these are myths that we hear that we can take as gospel that really, we should examine and we should question. And one such myth is that anger is bad. I grew up in a household where you were not supposed to be angry. You were supposed to grin and bear it. And when people did show anger, it was scary. And so you were supposed to push that emotion down. And what I realized professionally, and also, you could think about this in the context of faith, is when we get angry, that is an indication that a boundary has been violated. It's an indication that perhaps we did not have a boundary when we needed to have a boundary. It's an indication that there is injustice somewhere. Now, we are urged to be angry but sin not, but we're never told in the Bible not to be angry. angry. We're told to be slow to anger. And so I talk about the myths around anger and how anger is a legitimate emotion. And it does give us a message that something is not working and something needs to change. So there's a section of the book that focuses on myths to resist. There's another section that focuses on truths to embrace. And these are things that we need to accept, we need to embrace, and we need to come to terms with them and to be at peace. And so one truth to embrace is that we all have choice. You know, we're always making choices. Even our decision not to make a choice is a choice. And I put that in the book because I want my readers to understand that we all have an element of power. And I want us to understand that we're choosing, and how we tell the story about the situations in our lives. If we tell it from the standpoint of we don't have choice, that is disempowering, and it's also discouraging. And so I ask our readers to be very intentional about the choices that we have. And then I talk about paths to liberate, you know, things that we should be doing to liberate ourselves. And so this book, it focuses not just on the professional world, but it focuses on the whole person. You know, what is our spiritual practice? How do we show up at work? So I'm not just interested in telling readers this is how to get a job. I'm interested in talking to readers about how we heal our whole selves so that we can sustain ourselves. And so one of the sections, or one of the things that I talk about in this section about paths to liberate, is the importance of getting reacquainted with our inner child. Brian, a lot of us move through life making decisions, showing up in different ways based on experiences that we've had as children. But we're taught that as you grow, you forget about, you know, what you did maybe when you were 9 or 10. And I'm encouraging readers in this book is, no, you want to get reacquainted with your inner child. You want to understand why you do what you do at 40, where that started, whether or not it's helping you, whether it's holding you back, whether there's a new way to be for this particular season in your life. And so again, the book is broken up into those into 5 different sections that really gives tips and gives strategies and ideas for how we move through different aspects of our professional life and also our personal lives.
Wow, that's really powerful. And I love what you said about choice. I think it's such an important and overlooked often, you know, concept that, you know, we oftentimes have choice when we kind of assume that we don't. So
yeah, and if you tell yourself, okay, I don't have a choice, then it may prevent you from being responsible for things that you need to be responsible for.
So how would you say your faith is interweaved into the book?
So at the beginning of the book, I tell my readers that the stories I tell in the book, the experiences, it is filtered through the lens of faith. And I do that because I want people to know that as a woman of faith, I have made a choice that I'm not going to write a professional leadership development book and not mention my faith. You know, for a lot of people, a lot of progressive people, that can be taboo. It can be foreign. But what I tell my readers at the very outset in the first few pages is that this book talks about faith. And so as I give recommendations on how to heal, as I give recommendations on how to fortify ourselves in a world that doesn't always see and doesn't always position Black women as deserving of love, as beautiful, I talk about what the Bible says about us. You know, one of the scriptures that a friend of mine would always give me whenever I would start feeling down about myself or self-conscious is that scripture that talks about us being fearfully and wonderfully made and God knowing us even before we were created. And so I share that. Another thing that I share is the story about the woman who her husband died. She was in debt and the creditors told her they were coming to take her kids. And she went to the man of God and basically said, you know, what do I do? And the man of God said, what's in your house? And she said, well, all I have is a few jars of a few vessels of oil. And he told her to go and borrow other vessels and to borrow a lot. And basically, I use that parable to tell my readers that sometimes the keys to our survival, the keys to our success are right within our house. But if we're not careful, we can underestimate and devalue the gifts and the talents that God has given us because they may not look like the other person's. But if we are to get really, really clear about the things that have been God given, that will not only help us, it will help other people. And so I use different stories like that from faith to deliver important messages. And that's probably the one that I just shared is probably one of my favorite stories, parables that I use in the book.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So, you do a lot of work in racial justice, and I kind of feel that the church hasn't led as much as it should in that area, at least the white church. What are ways that you think that people of faith can exercise greater leadership around, racial justice?
I think, people of faith have to get better at truth telling, at telling the truth to ourselves, at listening as other people share their truth and creating space for that. So when I think about, before this session started, you and I had a conversation about your book and also ways to heal divides. And there are different countries such as South Africa that have used truth, reconciliation, and healing processes. I feel like if the United States were to do that in a serious way, there's no other institution better suited to house that than the church, if the church were to get itself together. And so I think that's a way that the church could show tremendous leadership. But before we do that, we have to look within ourselves, the ways that we are benefiting from white supremacy culture, the ways in which we have not told ourselves the truth, that we have believed a lie about racism, or the ways in which that we have perhaps benefited that we need to give up. And so I feel like the church can lead by first starting to create space for truth telling.
It's really interesting you bring up South Africa, because there's a couple of chapters in our book that refer to South Africa and Northern Ireland and Israeli-Palestinian, divides as things that we can learn from.
Yeah.
That we should learn from what they've gone through.
Right. And I don't know about you and your audience, but I'll tell you, when I make a mistake in my life, I feel really, really bad about the mistake. What gives me hope is when I'm able to sit with that mistake, to understand why I made the mistake, and then to craft a plan to do better. And once that happens, the mistake is still there, and perhaps there's some consequences associated, but how I process it and how I move forward, it's so much better once I've taken and created that space to understand what happened and to get clear about ways to prevent it from happening again in the future. And I think that's what the church needs to do.
Really, big time. There's a lot of acknowledgement that has yet to take place, I think, in our country in general.
Yeah.
So overall, what are you hoping the results of this book would be?
Well, I'm hoping that for Black women who read this book, I'm hoping that they will feel seen and affirmed. A lot of times we enter different professional spaces and we feel like we have to leave a part of ourselves behind, or we feel like, okay, I'm going through this. Does anyone really understand? And so I want Black women to read it and to feel affirmed. I want managers of all races to read it and to take away a commitment to be more sensitive, more intentional about how they engage with the people on their teams, the Black women on their teams and other people on their teams. For people who are committed to being better allies, for people who are committed to doing their own anti-racism work, I want them to read it and to gain information, and then to be able to put something in their arsenal that will help them. And so I'm hoping that this book brings illumination, that it brings a level of healing, and I want my readers to feel cared for, to feel comforted, and to feel seen in the pages of this work.
Wonderful, wonderful. So you're one of the lucky authors who was introducing a book during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how that experience has gone?
The experience has gone, it's gone fine. I think what complicated things for me is that my mother has been sick for many, many years, and she unfortunately passed in April of 2021. My book came out in February.
Wow.
And I remember, my first few book events, my mom was sick, but I didn't know that I didn't know she was going to pass. And then she got really, really sick at the end of February and was hospitalized. And I remember, getting ready for these book talks and thinking, you know, it's unfair that I'm here and she's in a hospital likely dying. And so I was just going through a lot of emotions with knowing that, that she was transitioning. And then I think that when she died in April, that was also difficult. And so for me, the pandemic, releasing a book in the pandemic, at first you have anxiety about what it's going to be like. But to me, the greatest challenge has not been the pandemic. It's been navigating, grieving, and also watching someone who you love, watching them die.
I'm so sorry that you've had to go through that. And that grief, the difficulty around that grief certainly has been exacerbated by the pandemic for a lot of folks.
Mhm.
So I really feel for you on that one.
Thank you.
So what about future books? Is there anything you can talk about in terms of ideas on that front?
So, so right now I'm writing a book of essays, and the book of essays, it focuses on issues in social justice, issues in current affairs, and some of the essays have already been published online in different publications, but others are just my thoughts on race, my thoughts on gender, my thoughts on what it means to be good witnesses in a time when I feel that many are pulling away from Christianity, and so what it means to be a witness in this particular era. So that's what I'm working on now that I can talk about. I have another project that I can't talk about.
Sure, sure. Well, I'm glad that you're going for tough topics. That to me is like, that's what we need to be talking about. That's what we need to be writing about, is difficult subjects that need to be discussed and need to be thought about more deeply. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So again, the name of Jennifer's new book is First and Only, A Black Woman's Guide to Thriving at Work and in Life. It's from Broadleaf Books. And Jennifer, thanks so much for spending some time to tell us about your work and your book.
Thank you for having me.